You finally pull the trigger on a premium gaming PC. You've spent weeks saving up, securing a rig packed with flagship, top-tier components. But that massive amount of raw power is contained within a physical box. Most of us shop for those boxes the exact same way. We sort by the highest tier graphics card and the fastest processor that fits our budget, and we hit checkout. We assume that if two computers have the exact same silicon on paper, they are going to output the exact same frame rates on our monitors. Take a look at this comparison table. Both sides have identical top-of-the-line specs, but the system on the left is choking in a generic, poorly ventilated case, losing 15% of its power to thermal throttling. The right system has optimized airflow and delivers 100% of its sustained power. The physical enclosure is dictating the performance. PC manufacturers often market these systems using synthetic benchmarks. Those tests only measure short bursts of peak performance. They look great on a spec sheet, but they hide how quickly that hardware drops off a cliff once the heat builds up. When you prioritize theoretical limits over the physical environment required to cool them, you are guaranteeing that you won't get the performance you actually paid for, because actual gaming is not a short sprint. It is hours of complex, sustained demand on your system. To survive that marathon, your hardware uses a built-in self-preservation mechanism called thermal throttling. When the silicon gets too hot and cannot breathe, it intentionally slows its own clock speeds down to prevent itself from melting. This line graph maps out a typical 3-hour gaming session. Notice how both systems start at the exact same peak frame rate at minute 1. But right at the 20-minute mark, the heat in the restrictive case overwhelms the cooler. The clock speed plummets. In your game, this translates to sudden frame drops, stuttering during complex boss fights, and input lag exactly when you need to react. Look at that shaded area between the top line and the bottom line. That is the lost performance zone. That represents the exact financial value of the premium silicon that is currently sitting useless inside your case. Saving a few bucks up front on a chassis with restrictive airflow essentially downgrades your expensive high-end components into cheaper mid-tier parts. To compensate for a restrictive case, manufacturers will usually apply a simple software band-aid. They just max out the fan speeds. But physics always wins. If you pump maximum air into a generic box with nowhere for it to efficiently escape, you just create internal turbulence. The fans are working overtime, but the trapped heat just swirls around the components. Forcing all that air through tiny glass slits or blocked vents comes with a massive acoustic penalty. The fans have to run incredibly aggressive curves just to keep the system alive. That constant, aggressive roar competes with your game audio, bleeds into your microphone, and puts constant wear and tear on the fan motors themselves. If your desktop has to sound like a jet engine preparing for takeoff just to hold a steady frame rate, the cooling design has failed. You are actively shortening the lifespan of your investment. To solve this, the highest tier of pre-built engineering ditches the generic box entirely. They use a chassis custom-built around specific thermal demands. This architecture relies on a concept called component isolation. You have to stop your processor and your graphics card from suffocating on each other's exhaust. Check out this cross-section of a standard tower. When the graphics card works hard, those red heat vectors rise straight up into the exact same chamber where the CPU cooler is trying to pull in fresh air. Specialized architectures, like dedicated thermal atriums, physically separate these zones. Fresh blue air feeds the CPU and GPU individually, and their hot exhaust is channeled directly out of the case without ever crossing paths. Once you separate the airflow, you can scale up the hardware. By using massive radiators, like 420mm liquid coolers, the fans can spin slowly and silently while still dissipating up to 1,000 watts of heat. There is a trade-off. Achieving this level of thermal mastery requires a larger physical footprint on your desk and a higher financial investment upfront. But if you are buying a flagship card like an RTX 5090, paying the premium for a dedicated thermal ecosystem is the only way to utilize the raw power you are paying for. Not everyone wants to buy a massive dual-chamber liquid-cooled supercomputer. If you want sustained performance on a tighter budget, there is a second approach. Instead of brute forcing extreme heat with extreme cooling, you simply generate less heat in the first place. We call this efficiency architecture. Pre-builts using this method integrate highly efficient, mobile-grade processors into a standard desktop chassis. These two bar charts show the difference. On the left, a standard flagship desktop CPU pulls massive wattage and generates huge heat. On the right, the mobile CPU pulls less than half the power, while outputting identical 1440p gaming performance. Because the mobile chip produces a fraction of the heat, you don't need a row of blasting exhaust fans. The system inherently runs cooler, requires far lower fan RPMs, and stays quiet for hours. The trade-off here is that you won't hit the absolute peak theoretical numbers in a CPU benchmark. But in most modern games, the graphics card does all the heavy lifting anyway. An efficiency-first pre-built guarantees stable, whisper-quiet frame rates at a price point that actually makes sense. So before you look at a single spec sheet, you need to evaluate the physical box. This is the airflow audit. As you can see on this scorecard, there are 3 visual checks you must pass before making a purchase. First, look for unobstructed intakes. Skip the solid glass front panels with tiny side slits and look for open, high airflow mesh designs. Second, verify clear exhaust paths. Make sure hot air has a direct route out of the top and rear, rather than bouncing off a solid metal roof back onto your motherboard. And third, check for internal component isolation. The chassis is a critical performance component. Treating it as such is the only way to protect your long-term investment and keep your hardware from degrading. Let's map this out on a quick decision tree so you can match your budget to the right thermal strategy. If you are chasing 4K resolutions and buying flagship hardware, follow the left side. Your massive investment demands uncompromising airflow. Look for premium thermal ecosystems with dedicated atriums and massive liquid coolers. If you prioritize value and immersion, follow the right branch. Look for efficiency architectures using mobile processors. Prioritizing lower heat generation secures your acoustic comfort without breaking the bank. Stop chasing theoretical numbers. Make intelligent cooling your primary filter, and ensure your hardware performs exactly the way it was meant to.